the question that strikes me is, how do we fulfill Dr. Martin Luther King's dream? How do we do that? You know, the movie Selma. First of all, I want to talk about the movie Selma. This is a movie that every American should see. And if you have not seen this movie, make a special effort to get out and see it this week. This is an amazing piece of movie making. And it's an amazing story, insight into how politicians respond to movements. Now, I realize that a couple of LBJ historians have come out and said, well, you know, because LBJ in the early on in the movie, he's saying to Martin Luther King is saying, we need voting rights now. LBJ had already signed the Civil Rights Bill, but Martin Luther King was saying, we need explicit legal protections, federal legal protections for voting. And down in Alabama, there was an entire county. It was predominantly black. Not a single black person was registered to vote. And in fact, the movie starts out with the old literacy test shtick, which was not that old. I mean, this was like, what, 1967? 66? And the amazing thing in the movie, and the presidential historians, they're saying, well, you know, LBJ said that, you know, the night that Kennedy was killed, he said, you know, we want to use this to get the Voting Rights Act passed. Well, yeah. But he was also a politician, and he also was looking for the moment to pass the Voting Rights Act. And, you know, in the movie, it's portrayed as Martin Luther King basically provided him with that moment. And the presidential historians are saying LBJ was a co-conspirator in that. He was saying to Martin Luther King, hey, give me the moment, I'll take it and use it. The distinction between those two is fairly small, and, you know, I don't think that this diminishes LBJ's legacy at all. And I get it that the woman who was the producer and director of the film told Salon Magazine, I think it was, that she didn't want to make another white savior movie. And so, you know, the whole Martin Luther King or the whole LBJ playing a role in this part was somewhat downplayed. I don't think that, I don't think the movie is that far from what's accurate from what I know of that era. And I'm not a scholar of the LBJ era, but I lived through it. I was there. I mean, I wasn't there at the marches, but I was, you know, I was a teenager at that time, but I remember it. And B, not only in this movie, and I'm not giving away the movie here. You will see this, and you will. This movie will astonish you. Not only did the movement politics of Martin Luther King push not just LBJ but all of America. I mean, at a certain point in the movie, Martin Luther King makes the point to his peers, to his colleagues, we're not just trying to move black America, we're trying to wake up white America. And he did. And that's very clear in the movie. But then later on in the movie, Martin Luther King kind of wavers, and this young teenager by the name of John Lewis, who's now a member of Congress, who was with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee with SNCC down in Selma, pushes Martin Luther King. So it's like this the whole message of the movie is ground up activism is how you change a country. It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. It's brilliant movie making. It's brilliant acting. I had tears in my eyes at least a half a dozen times through the movie, and it wasn't because of the violence. The violence was, I mean, it was, you know, white cops beating up black marchers. I mean, it's just, we all watched it on TV back in the 60s. In fact, it's what moved America. I would take my kids to this. I would take a little kid to this movie. This is just amazing. So how do we fulfill the legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King? I think basically he has multiple legacies. First of all, he has the legacy of civil rights and voting rights, speaking up, standing up for the African American community, and frankly, all minorities. Secondly, and these last two are largely forgotten by history because they're inconvenient truths for the Republican Party and thus for the conservative historians and the conservative media in the United States. Secondly, Martin Luther King was a tireless fighter and rhetorician against the Vietnam War. He was a pacifist. He was opposed to the Vietnam War. And third, he was an outspoken spokesperson for a reasonable minimum wage. I mean, a serious, genuine, reasonable minimum wage. I got too much paper now on top of my... this makes me crazy. There is just an incredible speech that he gave. Oh, by the way, in this voter ID laws, it's not only how do we fulfill the dream of Dr. King, but how do we stop it from going backwards? As I said, happy Robert E. Lee Day. I think, just parenthetically, I've talked many times with you about how when Jerry Ford pardoned Richard Nixon, and then Bill Clinton essentially pardoned, George Herbert Walker Bush pardoned a whole bunch of Reagan cronies for Iran-Contra. And then Bill Clinton essentially pardoned George Herbert Walker Bush by not prosecuting him for his role in Iran-Contra. And then Obama pardoned George W. Bush. Well, I think, the original sin was not Jerry Ford pardoning Richard Nixon. The original sin was Andrew Johnson not hanging Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee was a traitor to the United States of America. He not just a traitor, he raised an army and took on our country. And Lee and Jackson and those guys, they should have been hung. Or hanged, I guess is the correct word. So anyhow, but they weren't. We kind of forgave them, and now they've been rehabilitated by history. And now this report issued Wednesday by the General Accounting Office found that fewer African Americans have, the ID necessary to vote. In the last election, black turnout dropped 3.7 percentage points more than white turnout did in Kansas and 1.5 percentage points more than whites in Tennessee after voter ID laws were passed. We are going backwards. We're going back into Jim Crow. So what do we do about this? How do we get through this?